Title, Story, Karen vs. the World, A Barista's Nightmare. Hey everyone, let me tell you about the wildest day I've ever had working at a coffee shop. I'm Ava, 29 years old, and boy, did I have an encounter with the ultimate Karen? It all started on a particularly busy morning. The line at the coffee shop wrapped around the corner, and tensions were high. And then she appeared, Karen, the queen of entitlement. Karen waltzed in, her eyes scanning the room with disdain as she pushed her way to the front of the line. "Excuse me," she barked, "I demand to be served first." Now, we have this handy app where customers can place their orders ahead of time to skip the line. So, I politely informed Karen of this option, hoping to defuse the situation. But Karen wasn't having it. "Nonsense," she exclaimed, waving her hand dismissively. "I refuse to believe such nonsense. It's not fair that people get served before me." The customers around her tried to reason with her, explaining how the app worked, but Karen wasn't having any of it. She continued to protest loudly, causing a scene and holding up the line even further. I could feel my patience wearing thin as Karen stubbornly refused to listen to reason. But then, inspiration struck. With a smile plastered on my face, I whipped out my phone and placed an order on the app for Karen's favorite drink, a grande vanilla latte with extra foam. Moments later, her order popped up on the screen, right there in front of her eyes. Karen's expression shifted from indignation to shock as she realized the truth. She had been defeated by the very thing she refused to believe in, the power of technology and the fairness it brought to our chaotic world. As she sheepishly collected her drink and slunk out of the coffee shop, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. Karen may have lost this battle, but the world had won a small victory against entitlement. And that, my friends, is the story of how Karen versus the world played out in the humble confines of a coffee shop, reminding us all to embrace change and adapt to the realities of the modern world. Story number 2. Karen and the Unfortunate Dog Dilemma. Hey Reddit, gather round for a story that involves one grumpy Karen, a mischievous dog, and yours truly, Phil. Strap in, because this tale is about to get wild. So there I was, minding my own business, when suddenly I receive an earful from Karen, my lovely neighbor. Now, Karen's known for her, outspoken nature, but this time she was on a whole new level. She storms over to my doorstep, eyes ablaze with fury, and starts laying into me about my reckless negligence in letting my dog roam freely around the neighborhood. There's just one tiny problem: I don't have a dog. Apparently, Karen's precious pooch has been having some, digestive issues lately, and for some reason, he's chosen my lawn as his preferred restroom. And guess who Karen decides to blame? Yours truly, of course. No amount of explanation seems to satisfy Karen. She's convinced that I'm somehow orchestrating this canine conspiracy to ruin her perfectly manicured lawn. I try to reason with her, pointing out that I'm not responsible for her dog's actions, but Karen's having none of it. She's on a mission to make me pay for the perceived transgressions of my imaginary pet. Things escalate pretty quickly. Karen starts making threats about calling the homeowners association or even the police if I don't take care of the problem immediately. It's like I've stumbled into a real-life episode of doggy drama, starring Karen as the villain. But amidst all the chaos, a glimmer of hope emerges. One of our other neighbors, bless their soul, steps in to defuse the situation. They kindly explain to Karen that I'm not to blame for her dog's misdeeds and offer to help her find a solution. Reluctantly, Karen backs down, still grumbling about the injustice of it all. And just like that, the great dog dilemma of our neighborhood comes to an end, for now, at least. As for me, well, I've learned that sometimes you just can't reason with a Karen. But hey, at least it makes for a good story, right? Here's to hoping I don't find any surprise gifts on my lawn anytime soon. Story number 3. Title, Epic Story, The Battle of the Bus, David vs. Karen. Alright Reddit, gather round for a tale of epic proportions, the saga of David, a 16-year-old just trying to catch a ride home on the bus, and Karen, the queen of entitlement. Buckle up, because this is one wild ride you won't want to miss. It all started on a typical afternoon. I, David, found myself on the crowded bus, grateful to have snagged a seat near the back. Little did I know, I was about to become embroiled in a battle of wills with none other than Karen herself. Enter Karen, stage left. With a haughty glare and a pointed finger, she sets her sights on my seat, the very seat I had claimed fair and square. But here's the kicker, there were plenty of other seats available. "Excuse me, young man," Karen begins, her voice dripping with entitlement. "I need you to give me your seat." Now, normally I'd have no problem giving up my seat to someone in need. But when they ask in such a rude and demanding manner? Not a chance. I politely inform Karen that there are plenty of other seats available and kindly suggest she take one of them. But Karen isn't having it. Oh no, she's determined to have MY seat and MY seat alone. And so, the battle begins. Karen starts making a fuss, loudly proclaiming to anyone who will listen that I'm refusing to give up my seat for her. She even goes so far as to bother the poor bus driver, demanding he intervene on her behalf. But I stand my ground, refusing to be bullied by Karen's entitled antics. With each passing stop, the tension on the bus mounts as Karen's tirade grows louder and more obnoxious. Finally, the moment of truth arrives. The bus driver, clearly fed up with Karen's behavior, pulls over and announces that she's being kicked off the bus. Cheers erupt from the other passengers as Karen is escorted off, her protests falling on deaf ears. And just like that, peace is restored to the bus once more. As for me, I settle back into my seat with a sense of satisfaction, knowing that I stood up to Karen and emerged victorious. And as the bus pulls away, I can't help but feel a sense of camaraderie with my fellow passengers, united in our triumph over the ultimate Karen. And so concludes the tale of David versus Karen, a battle for the ages that will be recounted for generations to come. Story number 4. Title: Karen in the hospital. So this in November 2020 and my brother was in reanimation. Back there, due to the fragility of the patients, only one person was allowed per day per room to visit. I had a permission thanks to a psychologist who thought that it was better if I went with one of my parent. Well, one time we were waiting with my father to go see my brother and we had to wait in a corridor and the door would only open for medical staff or if you rang and someone inside let you in, otherwise you're not allowed. While we wait, a woman gets out of the block where the patients are. She asks the nurse when she can come back. "Nurse, ma'am, if you want to come you have to see with your nephew cause only one person is allowed per day. Call us to take the appointment later on." Then nurse gets back to her business and the woman starts throwing a fit screaming, "Karen, this is unbelievable, why would I need the permission from my nephew? This is my brother, I want to do." And she continued on and on. My dad responded, "Ma'am, you need to calm down, you are in the hospital RN, if you want to scream outside and for a good reason. The nurse never told you that you can't come, but to make sure it's not the same day as your nephew. Karen, but my brother is in a coma. Father, you think I'm here for fun? My son is in a coma too. These people also," pointing people waiting in the corridor, "have relatives in a coma. You frustrated that up to you, don't disturb people." When she sees that none of us would back her up, she quietly went wait a little bit further. Then a doctor came into the block and she tried to sneak in. My father, this hero lol, scream at her to come back right now and wait for someone to actually tell her to come in. This time I think she was really ashamed for good reason and she went home. In fact, this type of behavior could have caused to no visit at all due to COVID. Medical staff have other shit to deal than people not respecting boundaries. She really did scream for nothing. Story number 5. Title: Karen Encounter Story. Well, it finally happened to me. I'm not certain this is more of an entitled, selfish, or just a run-of-the-mill Karen story, but here goes. A few weeks ago I, 39M, was on a work trip and went to a restaurant to get a meal at a casual-type local place. Since I had a few hours to kill, I decided to dine in rather than get takeout. It was early afternoon, and the place was around 60% full. The hostess seated me at a two-top. Before I even sat down, I asked her for directions to the restroom, so I could wash my hands before eating. I left my ball cap/hat on top of the menu on the table, mainly so any server would know someone was seated. After the 2 minutes it took me go wash my hands, I returned and found my table and one of the 2 chairs gone, my hat and the menu included. I turned around to look for a server when I noticed that a nearby booth had a two-top table with 1 chair pulled up to it. There were 5 people seated, and only one at the two-top. On the floor a few feet away I noticed my hat. When I approached to pick up my hat, I asked the people sitting there if they had moved the table. A woman in the booth, Let's go ahead and call her Karen, responded that a friend showed up so they needed a larger or additional table and that this one wasn't being used. I responded that I had been seated there and was using it, and had left my hat on the table to indicate that while I washed my hands. She responded that there was no hat on the table. When I asked how my hat ended up on the floor, picking it up and pointing to it, next to her table, she said she never saw it. At that point I noticed a waiter, so I gestured for him to come over. I explained that this party moved my table over to their booth. I said I had no problem if they wanted to use one of the chairs for their additional guest, but that I would need the table. Karen cut me off at the end and said, to me, not the waiter, that I should just find another table since they were already using it. I responded, to the waiter, that I was using it, which was why I had left my hat there while I washed my hands. At this point the other woman who was sitting at my table started to get to, presumably to give me the table back, but Karen immediately said don't you dare to her, then stared at me and the waiter as if daring either of us to respond. The waiter started to say he was sure they could find her another table. She cut him off with a typical Karen response, we are not giving up the table, and I need to speak to your manager. This is when I decided I really liked the waiter and would give him a nice tip. He responded that he wasn't going to waste his manager's time on a complaining Karen and told her the options were to give me back the table to go eat somewhere else. I'm not sure how, but it worked, except for the staring daggers and muttered comments which I found amusing. She did not appreciate my periodic smirk or chuckle in response. Looking back I maybe could have just moved, but I also assumed it was an innocent mistake until Karen opened her mouth and hit me with that patented attitude.